When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Allbirds or Skims, sure, they have a fantastic product, and yes, they have brilliant marketing as well, but an often overlooked secret to it all is the business behind the business, making selling simple, and for millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet, and the not-so-secret secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout that Allbirds and Mattel uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/theathletic, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/theathletic to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/theathletic.
This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. Like many people, I've come into the new year full of hopes and aspirations for the next 12 months. Maybe, like me, you're anxiously pacing the floor waiting for the F1 season to begin, or perhaps you've set yourself a more regular fitness goal, like running your first marathon or commuting to work by bike. Whatever you plan to do in 2025, come into your own way with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Powered by Live Hydroscience, Liquid IV helps you break the mould. Liquid IV is so easy and convenient to tear, pour and enjoy, and it comes in several fantastic flavours, like their new Hydration Multiplier Sugar-Free Raspberry Lemonade, and other winners like White Peach and Rainbow Sherbet. As a regular flyer, I know how easy it is to become dehydrated almost without knowing it when you're travelling. That's why I always take Liquid IV on overseas trips. It's more than just a drink, and it's scientifically formulated to hydrate better than water alone. Just one stick and 16 ounces of water provides 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 essential vitamins and nutrients. And what's more, it's always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code THERACE at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code THERACE at liquidiv.com.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code THEATHLETIC. Make your first deposit of at least $10, place your first bet on any game, and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and already we've had more flexi-wing intrigue with a change implemented by the FIA for this weekend's Chinese Grand Prix. But what has triggered the change, and who will it hurt? I'm Ed Straw, and joining me to unravel the latest tech controversy and answer more listener questions is John Noble. Well, John, welcome to Shanghai. We both got in here in the past few hours, so peak podcasting condition.
Yeah, it's I don't know what day it is or what hour it is. I didn't do Australia. I was at home, but kind of living semi-Australian hours. So bizarrely, I've got Melbourne jet lag from coming from the UK, and then on a flight that was during the daytime. So I tried to sleep, but it wasn't correct. And I've had about 4 breakfasts today to try to stay awake, and now just a coffee. So it's going to be a long day, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've got no idea what day it is. I did fly from Melbourne I flew via Hong Kong. I've got a vague notion of what I feel the kind of, because it's afternoons we record it, that feels about right. But as for what day it is, who knows? But it's that stage of the season, isn't it? So
it's race 2. You've only done one race, Ed.
Exactly. Well, early part of the season, everything's all a bit out of time. But I feel we need to get that in there because who knows what quality this podcast is going to be and how coherent we are. You might see a decline in quality as we run through.
Caffeine wears off.
Exactly. I did have a double espresso quite recently, so if anything, I might be too far the other way. But anyway, lots to talk about. As always, we've got some listener questions as well. But first up, John, the day after the Australian Grand Prix, a technical directive was issued, makes the rear wing tests more stringent. So can you explain what that change is and why it's happened?
Yeah, this has been bubbling away since the Bahrain test. Basically, I sat down with Pierre Vacher, Red Bull's technical director, on the final day of the test. We were just running through how things were going for them, and I asked him, what do you make of other cars? Anything interesting? And he instantly snapped into rear wings, flexible rear wings. And he said, other teams, and he names McLaren and Ferrari messing around with mini DRS again. So mini DRS was basically you're flexing the rear wing upper flap a bit to open up the slot gap, which reduces drag on the straights. It gives you a straight line speed boost. So you can either play that for greater top speed, or you can play it for more wing in the corners to have the same top speed as everyone else. How you deal with it is up to you, but it's a valuable tool. It's what McLaren had last year. It helped Oscar Piastri win the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. So Red Bull quite angsty about this, obviously, and have been pushing a little bit. Before Melbourne, the FIA sent a TD, an updated TD that deals with flexible bodywork, to the team, saying they wanted to start monitoring the rear wings for Australia. So wanted some camera housings put in so they can put 4K cameras in with reference dots. They've looked to those video footage. They've checked some cars in Melbourne, but if you look at the official documents, the only car they did a rear wing flexibility test on was Lando Norris's car after the race. So anyway, they've responded to what they saw in Melbourne and have said for the next race, they're enacting a clause in the regulations which gives them the right to change the stress tests with no notice, basically, with immediate effect. So the slot gap that could have been 2 millimeters movement prior to this weekend is now going to be 0.5 for the future, but there will be a 0.25 leeway just for the Chinese Grand Prix. So it's going to force teams to have stiffer wings, and we'll stamp out this mini DRS behaviour.
Oh, I'm sure it'll still be talked about and be around. But this has been going on and on, isn't it? Because that 2 millimeter thing came in not so long ago last year. That was in response to what McLaren did. And it's obviously quite a big topic. We should stress that the FIA said everyone was legal in Australia. But obviously, that mini DRS thing, Australia is perhaps not the first circuit people think of that it'd be useful for. But actually, it is, because it's quite a lot of full throttle and there's some meaningful corners as well. So I don't think it's going to transform the competitive order, but it's a handy tool to have for that track.
Well, I think this is it's not going to be something that's going to make a car that wins the race. McLaren, for example, suddenly isn't going to be stuck in the midfield. It's ridiculous to suggest it's going to be a massive game change like that. But we are in a year, and probably were last year, where marginal differences are now making big differences. And if you fall off a little bit, if your top speed's not there, if you're burning your tyres up a bit too much, then suddenly you go from looking very, very competitive. Just look at Ferrari on Friday at Melbourne, for example. They looked to be up there, bang on the pace, had a bit of a wobble on Saturday, couldn't look after the tyres, fell down the order, and then had a lacklustre Sunday. You need to be on it with everything in your car this year to be competitive. So this isn't going to be a massive game changer that we will see from the outside, but it is a minor detail. There is a marginal gain to be had from it. And I think it says an awful lot that the FIA have chosen to bring this in immediately, because normally there's some leeway. We first heard wind of this on Sunday night in Melbourne. The teams were suspecting something would come in for Japan. So in the fact it's come in immediately is quite a big step. I can't recall very often when the FIA has acted so swiftly to do something, which means it must have been unhappy with what it was seeing.
Exactly. I suspect there have been some warnings as well, because they were very, very careful to say we reserve the right to make these sorts of changes. So I think that was a kind of sword of Damocles hanging over people, saying, look, if you take liberties, this is going to happen straight away, and you're not going to be able to do the normal thing of saying this has to come in later. So it's very interesting dynamic, isn't it? Because obviously you've got Red Bull have clearly got a big chip on their shoulder about this. whole thing, and they feel that teams have been getting away with stuff that in the past they were told not to do. And it's the usual flexi-wing thing, isn't it? There's never an end to it. It's impossible for this to be completely solved. And as you say, because everything's such tight margins, it just becomes a huge deal.
Well, I think especially with these cars, it's not about, if you look at Mini DRS at the back and flexi-wings at the front, they're not ultimately all just about boosting straight line speed. In the old days, you'd have a flexi-wing because you could reduce drag on the straights, pop back up in the corners, higher downforce, and that was what the tool was. But this current generation of car, the key to a quick lap is consistency through different corner ranges, where the car's in different ride heights. And as the car's bombing down a straight, the front wings, if it's rigid, the front wings getting more and more powerful as the car comes down. All the aero balance is on the front.
Because it's a huge ground effect device, the front wing itself.
Exactly. So in high speed, you've got tons of aero balance at the front, not much at the rear. So the car has high speed oversteer. But then the counter thing is at low speed, it's the other way around. You're suffering from low speed understeer. So actually a flexi wing has become an almost must-have tool to try and find the best compromise between these two. So this is what it's about. It's about balance. It's about balance and honing your car to have the best overall setup around a lap. So you can't spot this just looking at top speeds down the straight and say, this car is quicker down a straight, it's got a flexi wing. It's much more complicated than that now. But because it's so essential, it's become a big talking point. And this is why there was the talk over the winter about the flexi wing changes coming in. Red Bull wanted that in for race 1. McLaren and Ferrari pushed back, and was going to come in for race 7, then was delayed to race 9. So there are fights over this because it matters to performance. And it's not, as I said, it's about Mini DRS. It's not going to make a winning team suddenly dumped into the midfield, but it can be enough to swing what could be a race win another way. And just look at Oscar Piastri and Charles Leclerc in Baku last year. We're talking about maybe 1 kilometre, 2 kilometres an hour difference, and maybe 2 metres, 3 metres difference at the end of the straight, but that was enough to not allow Leclerc to get past Piastri. So, it definitely helped Piastri win that race in Baku.
Exactly, on such small details. Championships and races are won and lost, and it is compound gains from it as well. So I'm sure we're going to hear plenty more chatter about it this weekend. We do actually have a question from the Race Members Club related to flexi-wings. This was actually sent in before the technical directive was issued from Tim Harvard, but it's a kind of appropriate way of looking at this. He asks, since teams started using aero flexibility of front wings, the problems with porpoising and one-team domination has ended. Shouldn't the FIA just leave well alone and keep the regulations as they are now? So obviously not doing, but you can see the case for doing it.
Yeah, I think we asked, when we sat down with Nicholas Tom Bassett, I think you were in the same room, I think it was Austin last year,
Yeah.
we were talking about flexi wings and why the FI didn't just let it go, basically. I just think there's a concern that it would open an avenue of complete chaos and exploitation, and would get out of control to such an extent that they didn't want it to happen. So it's kind of just to try and keep control of the teams on this issue. But it's a problem that may well go away last year because we're getting active aero next year in 26. So we get this kind of low drag configuration for the straights and high drag for the corners. So in effect, you aren't going to want to mess around too much more with it then. But saying that, I'm sure some teams will be looking at it to try and work out if there's even benefits to doing it next year.
Exactly. There's always stuff you can flex for an advantage somewhere. And yeah, obviously, there's a few arguments against having flexi wings. One's a safety argument. That's the original argument. Now, you could argue with the technology now that actually teams should be on top of that, and that with the cost cap, that takes care of it getting absurd. But then again, if you allow the wings to flex, what else are you going to allow to flex? And I think you have to have this kind of uneasy balance going on because you can't be absolute on it. It's complicated, Formula One, isn't it? Motorsport's complicated. It's not just a line call in a sport, in another sport, is it? So it's one of those things that just has to kind of go back and forth, and it'll always be an area to exploit. And yeah, I imagine any team that's been successful over the past 15, 20 years has done it to a greater or lesser extent. Now, we'll get back to more listener questions shortly, but just a quick reminder that if you're listening to this podcast on Wednesday, then our 90% off your first month's The Race Members Club offer is still open. That door will slam shut at the end of the day. That gets you question asking privileges, exclusive podcasts, early access to some articles and videos, and much more. Also gives you access to our Patreon community, which has various chat areas to talk amongst yourselves and us here at The Race. So click the link in the episode description or search for The Race on Patreon to find out more. We'll get back to the podcast in a moment, but first, let me tell you about Grammarly. Your time and expertise are valuable, and with professionals spending nearly half the work week on written communication, focus is one of the most important things to have at work. With Grammarly as your AI writing partner, you can stay focused and get through your work faster with relevant, real-time suggestions wherever you write. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster with AI prompts, tone suggestions, and more. And what's more, you can enjoy it with peace of mind with Grammarly's enterprise-grade security and its business model that doesn't sell your data. Experience the gold standard of responsible AI with Grammarly, a tool that 93% of professionals report helps them get more work done. So what are you waiting for? Get more done with Grammarly. Download Grammarly free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast.
How can you grow your business from idea to industry leader? Bring your vision to life with smart business buying tools and technology from Amazon Business. From fast, free shipping to in-depth buying insights and automated purchase approvals, we deliver everything you need to achieve your goals. It's not easy to stand out from the crowd. Simplify how you stock up to get ahead. Go to amazonbusiness.com for support.
This Friday, from Disney, the musical movie event of the year arrives in theaters.
My name is Snow White. Flawless. Exquisite.
Get tickets now.
Waiting on a wish.
Snow White will have you on your feet
I think that's a wonderful idea.
and cheering for more.
I was thinking the same thing.
Experience the magical story.
Magic mirror on the wall. Who's the fairest one of all?
Snow White.
Disney's Snow White, only in theaters Friday. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Tickets on sale now.
John, another big news story of the Melbourne weekend was the fact the new Concorde Agreement has been signed by all 11 teams and F1. Alexander Law asks if you have some more details on how the balance of money will change and potentially could it be slightly more equitable overall?
It's not the full Concorde Agreement. It's only the commercial terms, which is quite interesting because in the past, when they've been announced, it's been the overall agreement. We get a statement. I remember one year in, I think it was Hungary, we had Bernie Ecclestone and Jean Todt did this photo shoot in the motorhome of them signing it. So there's two aspects to the Concorde. The money aspect, who gets the cash, where the cash goes, how all that element all works. And the second is governance. How is the sport run? How does it work with the commissions like Sporting Advisory Committee, Technical Advisory Committee, F1 Commission, up into the World Motorsport Council? How are the rules made? Who has the rights? All that sort of thing. That's the bit that hasn't been agreed yet. I found it quite interesting that they announced part one, the commercial thing, without the governance aspect.
There's no concerns about governance in Formula One at the moment, don't we?
No, exactly. Everyone's hunky-dory and happy. So which is interesting amid, the questions about the FIA and, how is Mohammed Ben Sulayem running things? Is this a move by FOM to announce it to kind of put some pressure and get an agreement in place as quick as possible? Do they want to drag it out past the election? I need to do some more digging. I wasn't in Australia, so I need to find out on that front. So I think it'll be interesting how that plays out and find out some more information. And I think in terms of the specifics of the commercial arrangements, I think it's fairly similar to what we've had before, except there will now be 11 teams. So whereas the money was split 10 ways, there's an extra team to come in. So everyone's going to lose a little bit. I think it averaged out about 4 million each for the teams that varies on this kind of straight line down of distribution.
In terms of the steps?
Yeah. No, in terms of overall. So everyone's the current 10 teams lose about 4 million or so each.
Sorry, yes, yeah.
But then Cadillac have to pay a $450 million it's called the anti-dilution fee, or I think it's got some other posh name that I can't remember now because I don't know what day it is, which then makes up for this loss. So in the short term, the teams won't lose out too much. And then they hope that Cadillac's arrival helps boost Formula One, brings more sponsorship, more commercial revenue, and then everyone's a winner after that.
Yeah, and it's just sort of a small evolution, isn't it, of where they were. The significant one in terms of that prize money was the last Concorde, wasn't it? The one that was done under COVID in terms of the prize money specifically that's referred to in the question.
Yeah, I think it's been much fairer now. Before this current Concorde Agreement, I think it was much more weighted towards the front. You know, Ferrari do retain their bonus. It was 5%, but there were incremental steps or escalators, I understand, in the current Concorde. The next one, I understand, it's been capped, so we'll stay at 5%. And then there's also, I understand, complications that it doesn't go to the F1 team, it goes to the parent company and can't be used for Formula One. But anyway, somewhere in the coffers of Ferrari, they get 5%. And it used to be, the previous Concorde had this Constructors' Championship bonus situation, which heavily weighted towards McLaren, Red Bull, Mercedes, even Williams at the time. But that was done. Bernie was picking teams off to try and get them to sign up, giving them big cash bonuses. So that skewed the earnings much more towards the front. Since 21, we've had a much fairer system it's like a point system, 3-2-1 for your top three in the constructors. So you do get rewarded for previous success. It is worth a decent chunk of money, but I think it is important that if you do bring success in Formula One, it's a meritocracy, you should get the reward for it.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable, but it's a structure that should allow all of the teams to be properly sustainable and profitable the way it was moved towards last time. So fairly positive in that regard. And yeah, I think the really interesting question with Concorde is when that final part of it is done. That might not be too long, but there's still a few things to be worked out there. Right, we're now going to move on to more of a flurry of questions now on all sorts of topics. Thanks to everyone who sent them in. We got all these around the Australian Grand Prix, and again, we can't get through all of them because we have so many, but thanks to everybody. We certainly read them all and we answer as many as we can. And I think there will also be a members exclusive bonus where I join Ben Anderson to run through a few more. Right, there's a question from Kyle Tyler Biggs that I'll take. The performance of the Williams in Australia qualifying compared against where they were at the start of 2024 is stark. Is this a clear sign the investment from Doralton and James Vowell's leadership have finally borne fruit and made a permanent improvement in fortunes for the team? Yeah, and of course that qualifying form carried over into Alex Albon's 5th place in the race. So what's that, 10 points, which is something like 58, 59% of what they scored last year. So yes, it shows that what Doralton and James Vowell are doing is having an impact. It's made Williams into a very credible, strong midfield team. I think the important thing as well is there were a lot of reasons why they struggled more last year, some of which have helped them to be in a better position. It was really a massive amount of pain in terms of trying to push things on in their processes, and they had all those troubles with the build and everything. And the hope was that doing that would pay off in the medium term, and everything's gone right this year. So that's helped them take a bigger step. The car's on weight, for example. And one of the frustrations this time last year was that they felt if the car was on weight with the pace it did have, it would have been a Q3 car. So kind of everything's kind of aligned. And I'd say probably the best way to characterise it is that Vowell's, Doralton, Williams era is now kind of on an even keel in that everything's caught up with itself. I think last year it was artificially held back and then the crashes compounded that. This year it's kind of that level playing field, level foundation to build from. That's a slightly confused way of phrasing it, but that's what happens when you record straight after flying. John, a question from Andrea Cockrell. Do you think there's a possibility of Yuki Tsunoda replacing Liam Lawson this season? And William Lewis and Andrew Goddard both asked similar questions. It's amazing. We had so many questions about Perez's position for years, and now one race in, legitimately, we've got this Lawson-Tsunoda question.
I mean, if possibility is, the smallest percentages, then yes, I think there is. But the ball's very much in Liam's court. Australia wasn't a good start for him. He was always going to be up against it, having never raced there before. The only guy on the grid. A weekend where he lost, time in FP3, tricky conditions in the race, didn't really get on top of the weekend at all. So I think he needs a reset, needs to go, but he's going to be up against it in China as well. It's another track he's not been at. It's a sprint weekend, so you're straight into qualifying on Friday. So I don't think Red Bull are in a position yet where they feel, we've made a mistake. let's get him out and get Yuki in. I think we're miles away from that at the moment. They need to give it time. They need to give Liam time to get used to the car. But if there's a scenario where Lawson doesn't improve, he can't continue having weekends like Australia. It's unfathomable that Red Bull would put up with it for the long haul if it didn't improve. And if Yuki does what he did in Australia, he lost out in the race because of strategy calls from the team, but he was quick, under control. He seems comfortable and happy in himself. The team seems in quite a good place. I think it's working well with him and Isaac Hadjar. Then, it is not an impossible scenario where if Lawson doesn't improve, Yuki continues doing what he's doing, Red Bull feel they need to make a change, then they think, well, let's get Yuki in and just have a look.
I would suggest that the time that would start to become a realistic possibility if things do go badly would be the August break this year. I'd still be surprised if that happens, and I think Lawson will pick up, but it's not been a great start to it, has it? So let's see how that one plays out. Another Red Bull related question from Andrew that I'll take: are Red Bull incapable of running two cars at the front? Reference points being Brabham in the early 1980s with Piquet and Benetton in the early 90s with Schumacher. I think Red Bull can run two cars. I'm not aware of there being massive effort or spec deficit. There's good people on the non-Verstappen side of the garage. It's not like here's all lots of half-used parts and whatever we can lob together. So there's no reason why they can't. The problem is that Verstappen is so good and the car's so particular that they struggle to find a second driver to slot in alongside them, and that's been compounded by the fact they've tried to do it by bringing in drivers from their own academy scheme that haven't necessarily worked, or rather than going for higher profile kind of proven top end drivers elsewhere, they went for someone like Perez, who was good, but it wasn't like they were signing Charles Leclerc, let's say. So I think Red Bull can do it. I mean, those comparison points are interesting. I think Benetton is very relevant because Schumacher had the same thing. If you speak to his teammates there, he could have this incredibly pointy car and he could deal with the rear end. So he had a car that was responsive, but he wasn't all over the place mid-corner. He could control it. Remember Johnny Herbert using the phrase, he could calculate it instantly, how to control it. And that was why often number two drivers struggled. But with Benetton as well. But they also had Benetton, there was a bit of a philosophy of that as well. Brabham even more so, like particularly when they had Hector Rabaka around alongside Nelson Piquet, for example. That was very much a money car. But I think Red Bull can do it, but it's a question of finding the driver. But what we do know is philosophically that they don't want two top guns, do they? They want Max Verstappen and a good number two. And funnily enough, it's probably easier to find someone to be a kind of joint number one, like a Leclerc or like Lewis Hamilton or something like that, than it is to find that number two who can slot in and be that famous 3/10 behind.
Yeah, they've never been a team that wanted two super class one driver, two alpha males, let's say, because teams often talk about kind of alpha males within a team. I think Christian's mentioned that in the past. I think they prefer keeping Max in a happy place, but they want a teammate, just keep him on his toes, come in 1 second behind him, keep racking up the points to help deliver the Constructors' Championship. I think if Lawson can contribute enough points to help in the Constructors, that's his job done. Doesn't need to do any more, doesn't need to win X number of races, just needs to give his contribution to it. But what will be interesting also, you mentioned about the difficulties of the car and Verstappen able to do stuff that some other drivers can't, is that when these new flexi wing checks come in for Spain, it's going to make the cars potentially back to more high-speed oversteer. Going to be a bit more nervous potentially in the quick stuff, which Max is brilliant at sorting out. So could that be another, step change in that battle between the pair of them?
Yeah, very, very possibly. Interested to see how Lawson gets on, and it's just the problem of driver tolerance. It's driving styles often used, but it's tolerance, because any driver will want a car that's quite responsive at the front end and can turn in and that they control. It's where are you in the scale on that? And these phenomenal drivers like Verstappen are right on that edge. There's a lot of drivers who just can't live with that one. Right, another one for you, John, that's related to Red Bull from Mark Wiley. Helmut Marko likes slating drivers like this year's rookies, but when is someone going to question his position? The Red Bull driver programme is a shambles and Lawson looks in trouble already. They spat out numerous decent drivers and have ended up with poorer options. What does Marko actually offer?
I think Marko, because we looked at this in the past when there was the kind of the civil war inside the team last year with Christian Horner and Helmut Marko, and Helmut fearing for his future. You thought surely this one of them is going to kind of lose out in this war, that it's not tenable for it to continue. But actually, Marko does bring a benefit to Christian. It's almost like a good cop, bad cop scenario, that Christian can get on, run the race team, focus on all that, and he can leave Marko to do elements of it he doesn't want to spend too much time doing. Checking out other young drivers, saying what he wants to say to the press, taking all that heat and attention away from him. And I think also Christian isn't a big fan of phoning up drivers and sacking them. I think he prefers signing them and patting them on the back and saying nice stuff. Whereas I think, every time you hear a driver's got a phone call and they've been told they've been sacked. I remember Kvyat was watching Game of Thrones or something, wasn't he, when he was told he was out for the Spanish
when he got Game of Thrones.
They always say it's a phone call from Helmut Marko. So I think Marko does aspects of the job that Christian doesn't want to do. So it kind of works together. And Marko has that link to Red Bull Austria as well. So he provides this kind of stepping stone between the Milton Keynes operation, what's going on in Austria, and kind of helps out on that bit. So it does have a use within the Red Bull family.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I do have a few concerns about whether I think things had evolved a little bit in driver schemes and moved a little bit away from how Marko's done it traditionally. But Red Bull have now moved to change that. They've got Guillaume Roquelin involved in that. Used to be Sebastian Vettel's race engineer, of course. So I think they've tried to kind of bring it a bit more up to date, and the scouting up to date as well with that, while keeping some of the things that Marko does offer. And obviously, sometimes he says stupid things. He's a very straight talking Austrian, even by Austrian standards, isn't he? He's he's a guy of a certain age. He's got his views. We know what he's talking about, and I think there are elements of the thing Marko does with young drivers that are quite beneficial, because it's pretty brutal in Formula One. You've got to perform or you're out. Now, you can argue whether Marko's the best for bringing them on, but he's looking for like these drivers who can be world champions, and they have to not only be very, very good, they've got to have that edge and be able to stand what Helmut Marko does. Now, I think he could evolve that position a little bit. I'm not sure it's the ideal way of doing it, but I can understand why people would look at what he says and the way he does it and think, oh, he's just a complete idiot. What a lunatic. But I think there are things about what he does that have value as well. So I'm sort of a little bit in the middle on this particular one, because you made some good points about some of the things he brings. But obviously, the other thing to remember is he answers people's questions. He doesn't go out into the paddock with a megaphone and make proclamations. People go up to him, ask him a question, like, what do you think of Isaac Hadjar's reaction to his crash? He will give you his honest opinion of it. And it sounds like he's like they're just constantly haranguing drivers in public, which he sort of is, but and he doesn't have to do that. But that's how that works. And so kind of being a straight talker and saying this stuff then breeds those questions as well, doesn't it, from people? Yeah,
it becomes a self-fulfilling circle almost, that if there's a figure in the paddock who you ask a question to and he gives you a PR puff answer that's boring and never gets reported, he doesn't get asked the questions. Whereas someone who is straight talking, is willing to say what they think and not care about the fallout from it, will keep getting asked questions, and it escalates from there. It's like Bernie. If a Fleet Street newspaper or something wants a quick hit for a guaranteed big sensational headline, because Bernie loves lobbing hand grenades in, is how he ran Formula One for years and years. Pick up the phone to Bernie, ask him for his views on something. You'll get a good answer, decent headline, bish bash bosh, done.
Absolutely. The other thing I would say about Marko is I do think the weakness in that scheme of late has been driver selection. And I think that's an area where you can say, well, what's going on here? Drivers being dropped and being brought back, Brendan Hartley, Alex Albon, Danny Kvyat, and also just them missing out on some of the better talents. So there's a scouting question there, and I think that's where Marko has partly been left behind. There's now so many shows in town in terms of looking for the next big thing. It's like football scouting now. People are combing through karting. Mercedes, you look at what they do. Williams are getting in on the act now. And it's not just somebody catches your attention on a given weekend. You have to really study and absorb and then sell yourself to those drivers as well. And that's probably the one downside that Red Bull's got, because on paper it should be great because they've got 4 seats in F1. They keep bringing drivers. No entity has brought more drivers into Formula One over the past 20 years than Red Bull. Yeah, if you're sat there as a 10-year-old next big thing karter, thinking, oh, there's a Red Bull offer or there's a Mercedes or these other ones, you might think, oh, is Red Bull the way you want to go or not?
Yeah, I think the game has changed. I think the days of seeing someone is quick in, whether it was Formula BMW at the time, even Formula 3 to some extent, when you're picking people out at that level. Now it's miles too late. They need to be picked up in karting. And you look at Mercedes, they brought Antonelli all the way through into Formula 1. Now their focus now isn't now on finding the next good Formula 3 or Formula 2 driver. They're going much further, deeper down into karters. So you're trying to find people younger and younger and younger, but it's quite a competitive thing. So you're fighting off against Ferrari are chasing people, Alpine are chasing people. Yeah, obviously Mercedes, McLaren are sniffing around. So there's a much bigger pool of people fighting for drivers much earlier in their careers. So it's much harder to get your hits and misses because you haven't given them the time to properly develop and see if they, was this season due to equipment? Was it due to the rest of the grid not being as competitive as it was in the past? You could give them 2-3 seasons and say, yep, Sebastian Vettel, he looks a superstar, we'll take him, go. Or Max Verstappen, yeah, he looks great, we'll take him, go. Now you've got to commit to someone, because if you wait 6 months, you've lost them to Ferrari, or you've lost them to Mercedes, or you've lost them to a driver manager who's come in and then will start playing off teams against each other.
Yeah, exactly. It's a huge battleground now. That's the best way to look at it, and that is an area where Red Bull needs to kind of pick up. The other final thing I'll add on Marko is I think I don't necessarily think the way he acts on it is the way I would do it, but what Marko understands is that you need that sort of robust mentality, and that is something that partly can be trained, but also some of it's innate, and that's one of the reasons why he puts pressure on people. Now, you could argue that he does it in a counterproductive way, etc. But fundamentally understanding that if you want someone to be a world champion, they need to have that Max Verstappen mentality of just not caring about anything else. Just like, this is what I do. That's so important. So that's one of the things Marko is good at, spotting and testing. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm massively defending everything he does, but it's like everything. There's positives and negatives there. But yeah, the big thing for me is that scheme needs to modernise, and I think it is, particularly with Rocky involved. Right, question from Daniel Roberts: should Ollie Behrman have been allowed to participate in the Australian Grand Prix, since both driver and team performed poorly across all practice and qualifying sessions with no mitigating circumstances? Why is the FIA compromising the integrity of the sport? Yeah, it's a fair question. Ultimately, the reason he was allowed to start was Behrman set competitive times in FP1. So his fastest time in FP1 was 1.9 seconds inside the 107% cutoff. And they will let drivers in that scenario because Haas wasn't that slow. Now, they might have reconsidered it if he'd crashed in qualifying as well, say, rather than having a gearbox glitch. And they said, hang on a minute, you've crashed, you've been off in 3 sessions or whatever. But if you do that pace and you're a credible driver, then they're going to let you in, basically. And obviously, Behrman is well known as a credible driver. The sporting integrity point is a fair one because rules are there for a reason. But that 107% rule is there to stop incredibly slow cars or incompetent drivers being on the grid. And Behrman had a good, clean race, didn't he? So I think that justifies their move.
Today at T-Mobile, I'm joined by a special co-anchor.
What up, everybody? It's your boy, Big Snoop Deal Double G.
Snoop, where can people go to find great deals?
Head to T-Mobile.com and get 4 iPhone 16s with Apple Intelligence on us, plus 4 lines for $25.
That's quite a deal, Snoop. And when you switch to T-Mobile, you can save versus the other big guys' comparable plans plus streaming.
Respect. When we up out of here.
See how you can save on wireless and streaming versus the other big guys at T-Mobile.com/switch. Apple Intelligence requires iOS 18.1 or later.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
I was never really a runner. The way I see running is a gift, especially when you have stage 4 cancer. I'm Anne. I'm running the Boston Marathon, presented by Bank of America. I run for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to give people like me a chance to thrive in life, even with cancer.
Join Bank of America in helping Anne's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/supportAnne. What would you like the power to do? References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation. Copyright 2025.
Right, John, into the final part of the podcast. Question from Bart. Has the fan base become overly reactive? It could be I'm just seeing a vocal part of the fan base, but I'm shocked and annoyed by the amount of people deciding everything is over now that the first result is in. Same goes with calls about drivers, both positive and negative. Just give it some time already.
Yeah, but I think there is a overly reactive nature to it. But I think that's true of everything in life, though. That everything kind of gets quickly now categorized to be black and white. People don't take time to reflect. You know, if we said at race 1, right, we're not going to write any analysis or give our verdicts on who's quickest until race 5, because then we've got a nice long window to see everything, it wouldn't work. So you've got to try and base things on information. And I think maybe, you know, in terms of, you know, fan bases giving drivers, you know, verdicts and fully supportive of the driver they support and fully against a driver they don't like, I think that's just a consequence of a sport that's become very popular. One of the successes of Formula One is it's created personalities from the drivers, helped by Netflix, helped by social media. You create personalities, you create heroes, you create villains, and that has a consequence of fans getting behind their heroes and hating their villains. You see it in every sport. We go to, you know, international football matches for your team, you will not like the opposition. So I don't think there's anything unique for Formula One. I think it's, you know, it's moved away a lot from, you know, how it potentially was in the 80s with a smaller fan base. But even then you would have had your Prost fans and your Piquet fans and your Mansell fans and your Senna fans and those not liking the other. So I think it's just amplified now through social media, through the ability of everyone to comment, through the ability of everyone to offer opinions and show it all around. So I think the feelings are similar now, but everything's just amplified and made bigger and louder. It's just the nature of the world we live in now, basically.
Yeah, very much. So I think it depends on what sort of thing that conclusions are being drawn on, obviously. Now, just because McLaren dominated the first weekend doesn't mean they'll dominate every weekend. So yeah, I think you have to let the data evolve, but it's like you have a model at any given time, don't you? And every time there's another race weekend, you have more data and more knowledge to put into it. So you go before the first race, after testing, you have the weakest possible model, and then it just gets more and more robust over the 24 races if you're looking at performance and that kind of thing.
But then look at, after qualifying in Melbourne, George Russell straight away said, all right, McLaren have got it one already, they can switch focus to 26 already, no one's going to stop them. So everyone's guilty of jumping to conclusions. We all did it last year. I think all of us would have said, you know, Max Verstappen and Red Bull are going to absolutely dominate this season. Potentially can win all the races. They missed out on Australia because of the brake problem. But you thought this is going to absolutely roll on. We left China here last year. You know, no suggestion at all that the season was going to get any closer. Then it all changed in Miami. So you can only base your opinions on what stuff looks like now. And it'll be like a football. If a football team, you know, arrives in the World Cup final having won every match on the way up 6-0, gets the final, you're going to say this team is dead favourite, but then their star striker picks up an injury or they've got some players out because of red cards and the game changes. But you're just basing information on what you see at the time.
Well, the next question I'll take comes from Edward Weir. Is it realistic to think Ferrari can mount a Drivers' Championship challenge in light of how well McLaren seems to have started? Janus van der Waal says Australia is an outlier, thus how well can we state that Ferrari is not competitive enough? Yeah, there's sort of two perspectives on the same thing there. It's still realistic for them to mount a Drivers' Championship challenge or a Constructors' Championship challenge for that matter. And although Australia is an outlier, particularly when it comes to pacing qualifying, that last sector factor with the role the tyres play, that can distort things a little bit. So yeah, it is just one race. I would say it does mean there's some question marks over Ferrari. I wouldn't rule them out by any stretch of imagination. They can fight for the championship. I do have a few concerns about that car. I talked about during testing that it seemed to be a little bit... Sometimes it looked really good. Other times it seemed to have little weaknesses and limitations that were showing up. So I think Ferrari have got some work to do, but it's just one weekend, isn't it? I don't think you can draw definitive conclusions. It could be that they just messed it up there, and the combination of getting better on top of the car and an upgrade, and things change. You wouldn't have talked about McLaren as a championship threat after Australia last year, would you?
No, and if Australia last year had been race one, we would have left there thinking, what, Ferrari looked really, really strong for the World Championship. Red Bull appeared to be a bit of a shambles. McLaren don't look fantastic. So it's a unique track. It was a strange weekend. I think we've seen hints of everything, but I think things are actually look closer than they appeared. I think the gap, McLaren's advantage was a bit exacerbated in Melbourne just because of the combination of the tyres. There were two circumstances where if a car's nice and easy on its tyres, it's going to excel, and they were qualifying and the race.
Yeah, we have seen that at times in Australia, that advantages get stretched just because of that particular factor. Question from Nevin Knowles for you now, John. I fear everyone's hope of an epic title battle this year may unfortunately be over already. If McLaren really has 3 to 5 tenths advantage and wins 4 out of the first 5 races, by the time we reach Miami, teams would have switched all development to 26 because it doesn't make sense to continue developing the 25 car when you're already so far behind. So McLaren will dominate and all teams will just focus on 2026, and it will be 2022, 2023 all over again. Obviously, that's kind of the worst case scenario that's being laid out. I mean, there is always that lingering thing of 2026, but it's still a bit early, I think, for any of those teams to think, we'll just go. Despite what George Russell said, I think that was as much aimed at just the wider world and building a narrative, just to sort of encourage F1 or the FIA if they might want to intervene on a few things, or think about what you can do with flexi-wings, although Mercedes have benefited from flexi-wings as well. So, yeah, there's all those things kind of in that particular debate.
Yeah, I think if McLaren qualify the next 5 races 4 tenths in front and absolutely dominate and disappear into distance 30 seconds up the road, they can then shift development off. But then the fight behind's close, and those teams, if you're Ferrari, Red Bull or Mercedes, you can't afford to switch development off because you don't want to drop to 4th place. So they're going to have to carry on as long as possible. I think most teams in the end are going to develop till the summer, because you hit a point where the processing time for signing off on a development to it then going through the system, being manufactured and brought on, makes it pointless after a while to commit to anything else. So I think you'll just naturally get to the summer and go on. But I don't think we're going to have a famous last words here. I don't think we're going to have a scenario where McLaren absolutely walk these next 4 or 5 races. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think Melbourne exacerbated their advantage. They could look after the tyres in Sector 3, which proved critical in qualifying. Because there wasn't much between them and Red Bull and Ferrari in the first 2 sectors. So that helped. And then the race, it was about keeping the Inters alive. And McLaren just did it brilliantly. So I think if we get to tracks where front graining could be a problem, which can be a case here in China, for example, then it could be a different picture. Lando intriguingly also says, I'm not quite sure what the basis was, because his Bahrain long run was really, really impressive. But he reckoned if they went to Bahrain now, they wouldn't win, which I find quite intriguing. But whether it's a temperature...
It's a wind sensitivity concern. They're really concerned they're very wind sensitive, and that could hold them back in Bahrain. Now, the one thing there is, particularly on day 3, when it was a bit windy in Bahrain, everyone's wind sensitive. So it could just be that they're a bit weaker, but so's everyone else. So, yeah, but I think they are legitimately a little bit concerned about that. I think Norris might be slightly over-egging it, but I think there's a little question mark in their heads about if the car's a little bit sensitive aerodynamically.
Yeah, and I know the early phase of the Melbourne race, McLaren were miles up front. They'd completely dropped Max and he was well behind. But when they got into phases where there were slick tyres, or even towards the end of the race as well, when the degradation hadn't kicked in, Max was well on the pace of Lando. It's not impossible that Max got close enough to launch it down the inside at a corner and try to pull a move off, and could have potentially won that race still. So it wasn't as if Lando came home. It was an absolute breeze all the time. So I think there's plenty of fun left in this championship, and I think this weekend will be really, really interesting because it is a proper track. Challenges the cars, big variety of corners, long straights as well. So I think we will get a much clearer picture of where things stack up after this weekend than we've had from Bahrain testing, which was unique track surface and unprecedented weather conditions, because those combinations you never have on a race weekend. And Australia's a one-off as well, with track surface layout and the weird temperature. So as long as it doesn't do something weird like snow, but as I look out the window here, it's blue skies, a bit chilly, but it's looks decent, then I think it will be an interesting weekend.
Next up, Jan Alexander asks, did Racing Bulls make a massive step since testing, or is there another main factor at play like track characteristics or tyre compounds? I think Racing Bulls have impressed me in that every time they run, basically every day, they've been getting stronger. I think if you plotted where certainly where I thought they were in pre-season testing, it was kind of day one, it's like, oh, they're a bit kind of 9th, 8th. And then sort of day two, thought, well, maybe they're maybe nudging up towards 8th. And then we had them 7th in the end. And then, of course, Tsunoda was the lead midfielder in qualifying, so right up there with Williams on pace. Did have a bit of a toe, so maybe Albon would have been ahead without that. But I think they've got quite a nice, solid car that's doing what they needed to do. They battled through a bit of an understeer problem. It looked good on track in Melbourne. So I think they've got quite a nice, balanced car that's doing what they needed to do, giving the drivers confidence, which helps. So I think they've just had a really nice linear process of understanding the car. Now, again, we'll get this weekend different track. The track characteristics are a little bit harder to say. Obviously, some long corners here. If you do have a bit of an understeer problem, that can cause you some difficulty. But yeah, I think Racing Bulls have just made some decent progress. Each day, good linear step. Right, John, a question from Harsh Kare. Considering McLaren has a relatively strong car and Red Bull is struggling slightly with theirs, who do you think is the biggest threat for Norris for his Drivers' Championship chances? Let's say the top 3 drivers who can beat him in this scenario. I guess Piastri's one because he's in a McLaren.
Yeah, well, Piastri's obviously the main threat because he's got the same car and he's obviously fired up. He was quick in Australia. But I think what's intriguing about that battle between Oscar and Lando in Australia was because Oscar closed down in on him, and before McLaren temporarily called off the fight. But what we don't know is did Piastri push his tyres too much in that phase to close up? So was Lando just controlling it, nicely playing the long game? So even if they'd let them race and Oscar had got past, would he then have suffered the same fate he suffered as he dropped back when the tyres went off? So I think we didn't see the full extent of who was quicker or not in that race, because it could have been clouded by who was looking after their tyres better. Just as Max was pushing Lando like mad for the first 16 laps and then completely fell away. So I think we've not yet seen that, but they look close. And I think even in qualifying in Melbourne, I think Lando got a toe into turn 1 in qualifying, which gave him a tiny little advantage. And these are the sort of differences that can make the difference in the end, because whoever starts on pole has a big advantage, can control things from the front. So I think that's an intriguing battle there. So Piastri's got to be one. Max, you can never rule out. I mean, considering how down in the dumps that team and he seemed on Friday in Melbourne, he just felt the car balance was there. They're just not quick enough. It's going to be tough. We're not coming back. And then bam, next day on the pace. And I think Lando in the race, looking in his mirror, seeing that Red Bull again, must be thinking, oh, what's happening? And you just know any small sniff of opportunity, Max is going to be there. He's just consistent. He's pushing hard. Red Bull are, pushing hard on the flexi-wing aspect. Will be, knuckling down for a proper fight, trying to maximise every opportunity.
And they're great operationally.
Yeah, and they're robust on strategy and pit stops. Yeah, sure, they could have pitted Max a lap earlier in that final phase of the race. But I think there was nothing to lose at that point. They weren't going to jump ahead. So it probably was worth a roll of the dice, because you're into a small chance to gain something, no chance to lose anything. So you've got to say Max is there. And I still think we've not seen what Ferrari can do.
Yeah.
I think we didn't see... I think Ferrari's weekend fell apart on Saturday. We don't know why properly. We've got hints of it was overheating its tyres too much, which cost it in qualifying, and then it was trapped in traffic in the race and it didn't come alive. But the pace we saw on Friday seemed quite quick at times. So we need to understand, did they go a wrong way on setup? Were they struggling to understand the soft tyre? I think a lot of teams were confused by it and couldn't work out how to extract the pace of it. So I think this weekend will give us a much better indication. But I think if I need to pick 3 drivers who Lando needs to keep an eye out for, then it's Piastri, Max and Leclerc.
Yeah, same 3 from me. And the final question comes from Jacobus VDL. He refers to a Scott Mitchell-Malm article on the Hamilton versus Leclerc qualifying session. It quotes Hamilton as saying, from just the minute he went out, he knew what the car does, and me, I was just building up to that through the weekend. Given Vasseur said the Ferrari car is 95% new, as a general question, does a team's car retain similar handling characteristics through changes in design and regulations? If so, why would that be, given many of the changes are quite radical? Yeah, well, there's a couple of things at play here. One of them is the more mundane thing, in that every team's got their own, particularly when you go from engine to engine, their own particular approach in terms of what you've got with all the diff settings and this kind of thing. You've got this massive menu there of things you can do that will have certain effects, and your brake shapes and all that kind of thing. So Leclerc will have this massive database of knowledge of, you do that, this happens, or this clever mode or whatever, it'll do that. Whereas Hamilton's gone in there and he'd be like, I don't know what that is, don't know what that does. Whereas Leclerc will think, at Spain last year we did this. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that even if you change the car, all the kind of science and the philosophies and things tend to have continuity in a team. It does evolve over time, but that's when we talk about the DNA of cars. There are things there that will have similar feel and characteristics. It's quite an intangible sort of thing, but obviously using all the same kit, the same knowledge, the same people. So, for example, when you come to stating let's just say your kinematic characteristics of the suspension, if you do it from one year to another, even if you change it a lot, let's say for aero reasons, you're still trying to get the same things. You still might be wanting to try and control the aero centre of pressure and the aero centre of pressure shift in a certain way and want a certain thing there. And there's lots of different ways to skin a cat. So there are those things that continue, even though the car changes. It might just be another bite at trying to get the car to do the same thing you wanted it to do the previous year, if you like, if that sort of makes sense. So it's that sort of familiarity and knowledge. So there's things that there's intangible feel things that go from year to year, plus all those bigger kind of knowledge things. But it's been quite interesting to see whenever you get a driver moving, they have this process, and it takes a good half season. But Hamilton's really cast light on it because it's Lewis Hamilton, a great driver, because it's such an amazing thing him going to Ferrari. It becomes a big talking point, doesn't it? Because people actually start to understand, or it's more in plain sight, all of these things that you gain. Your first year is a learning year in a team. Yeah,
I think teams have a certain philosophy of the best way to approach a lap time, basically. And it goes much deeper than just being fast in the corners and quick down the straights.
If you can do that, that's the ideal.
Yeah, but in terms of where do you extract lap time from? What are your philosophies on handling, on aero balance, mechanical balance? How does the car behave? What are the characteristics you're chasing? And as you stay at a team over years, then you build up that database of knowledge, and you know that we are changing the front suspension of the car for this year to address this problem we had last year, and this is what we're chasing, and this is the benefit it brings, and this is the focus we need to do on. And then I can optimize this change with what I learned last year with these tools to improve this aspect. And I think you're right, Lewis has come in and has given us some fascinating insight on elements like he sits there and they'll talk about certain tools they can use, whether it's switches, whether it's a change of suspension setting or springs or anything like that. But he doesn't even know what part they're talking about, because you've had 12 years at a team where part X is called Y, and now suddenly he's gone to a team where part X is called Z. So he's needing to learn everything from scratch. And these uncertainties pick you out. You look at, well, the classic example is Carlos Sainz in the Williams. They had a certain safety car mode that is enacted on the car that has an impact on gear shifts. In the race, having not done it before, shifts up, gets the torque completely different to what he's experienced before. He's in the wall. So, I mean, that's an extreme example of different things being very, very different. But Lewis has talked, about the, approach to corners is just a world away from Mercedes, that how they deal with aero balance, how they deal with those changes, how they deal with mechanical balance. He says he sit there in the cockpit of the car and close his eyes, and even the vibrations from the engine are completely different to what he's experienced before. So everything's new. And when you're coming down to the final tenths per second, all the tiny details are really, really important, especially because you're manipulating a car lots and lots of times around a single lap. It's not just a case of having lopping on Charles's setup to your car and going away with it. You need to adapt and learn, and how you approach corners and on the brakes and off the brakes, and do you carry more speed in? Are you looking for more speed on the way out? Tons and tons and tons of things to learn. So it is a learning process, and there's no way to shortcut it. I think Melbourne was a bit of a wake-up call for Lewis and Ferrari about the steps they still need to make. But I think the progress he made last weekend, will continue this weekend, and I think at some point it will click. But it's not something that can happen overnight.
Yeah, I'm supposed to use an analogy that people relate to. Many people who listen to this will have changed jobs, say, and let's say you're doing exactly the same job for a different company. There'll be lots and lots of detail things. You're all trying to do the same thing, but there will be just slightly subtly different ways, or maybe there's some clever shortcut or trick you can do that everyone knows about, but because you weren't there last year when they first did it, it's not kind of on your menu of things. And just kind of internalising all of that, for example. For example, even if they were to change a system, it would still be done using the underlying way they do it, whereas another company might do it a different way. That just kind of gives some idea of some of the things that you're dealing with there.
It was like the race traces Lewis mentioned last weekend. He's been looking at, when they went into Melbourne, looking at strategies and how races played out in the past. He's given the race trace map, which every team has, and it was done in a complete opposite way to how Mercedes do it, which is fascinating. So he needs to kind of relearn that process where pluses and minuses, and you just start again, and you just need to relearn everything. It can even be the driver colour on a trace. That I know in the past we've done race traces of, say, George and Lewis at Mercedes in certain colours, and then you mentioned to us, oh, actually our internal colours are different to those two colours, so people aren't used to it. So these are all these tiny little quirks that we don't see much from the outside, but all matter in that learning process as you go on.
Yeah, and he's going to be working through that. I think it was, as we discussed on the review podcast, actually a sort of promising weekend for Hamilton, because there were areas where he was actually potentially a little bit quicker than Leclerc in the way he was doing things. So really interesting to see how that plays out over the coming season. Well, thanks very much for those questions, and thanks for your excellent answers, John. We've got the Chinese Grand Prix coming up in a few days. We are here in position, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.
What up, y'all? Zena Kata here with a huge announcement. We're dropping a new show. No off-season, The Athletic Women's Basketball Show. Same place, same time, but we're bringing the heat with some brand new energy. Join myself, Ben, Chantel, and Sabrina as we give you an inside look at the game with candid conversations, in-depth analysis, and taking on the hottest topics around women's basketball. Plus, we're bringing in the biggest names in the game to weigh in on all the action. So mark your calendars, because no off-season, The Athletic Women's Basketball Show is launching Monday, March 17th, with fresh episodes every Tuesday and Friday. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.